Hello, good evening. Welcome to Novara Live. My name's Bastani. Tonight, I'm very happy to say I'm joined down the line by Kieran and Andrieu. Kieran, how are we?
Well, I'm just starting to get back into the swing of things, Aaron, and nothing makes me feel more in the swing of things than co-hosting with you on a Tuesday evening.
Yeah, we did our Downstream event recently. Great talking to Kieran. You can watch that over on YouTube. This is the first time, though, we've done the show together on a Tuesday since, of course, Kieran went on the Global Summit Flotilla, was kidnapped by the IDF. You can see our conversation talking about all that and more, like I say, on the YouTube channel. However, we've got a whole day's news to cover, and it's a big old day, I must say. On tonight's show, the row over Aston Villa's ban on Maccabi Tel Aviv fans continues. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy begins his 5-year jail term, and Zack Polanski takes on the mainstream media as the Green Party rises in the polls. Stay tuned for all of that. But before we get started, you might have noticed the internet sucks now. That's the subject of our next Downstream IRL event, where I'll be speaking to the journalist Cory Doctorow, one of the sharpest tech critics in the world right now. Cory's newest book, Shitification: Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It. That event is on Monday, the 17th of November at Earth Theatre in Hackney, London. Tickets are available via the link in the description below. As ever, if you'd like to support our work here at Novara Media and join Michael Walker's Barmy Army, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. And make sure to let us know your comments tonight using the YouTube chat or just tweeting at us on the hashtag Novara Live. I'd like to start by letting viewers know that our first story tonight contains graphic descriptions of sexual abuse. Virginia Giuffre, the most high-profile victim of multi-millionaire sex criminal Jeffrey Epstein, has a memoir posthumously published in the UK today. Giuffre's explosive memoir, called Nobody's Girl, includes harrowing details of her abuse at the hands of Epstein and his girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, and has unsurprisingly put British royal Prince Andrew firmly back in the spotlight. In her memoir, Giuffre alleges that Prince Andrew sexually abused her 3 times at the age of 17. She describes 3 alleged sexual encounters with Prince Andrew, calling him, quote, friendly enough, but still entitled, as if he believed having sex with me was his birthright. Giuffre recounts in heart-rending detail how she was allegedly abused by the prince in 2001, and he even correctly guessed her age before telling her, quote, my daughters are just a little younger than you. Prince Andrew has always denied any wrongdoing in relation to Virginia Giuffre. However, he paid a substantial settlement to her back in February 2022, reportedly to the tune of $12 million, or about £9 million. Giuffre died by suicide in April of this year. The publication of Nobody's Girl has heaped more pressure on Andrew, and Amy Wallace, who co-authored Nobody's Girl with Giuffre, has some suggestions about what the prince should do now. Here's what Wallace told ITV.
Prince Andrew can deny, and he has repeatedly, that he himself is not a person who did anything wrong. I'll leave it at that. But he was in the houses, he was on the jets, he was on the island, and he could come forward and help investigators. Remember, he said at one point that he was perfectly willing to do so, and then that help never materialized. So that avenue is still open to him. He could still come forward and say, I feel terrible about this. I'm still not going to admit any wrongdoing on my part, but I do understand that women, girls, young girls who are the age of my daughters, at the time that I abused Virginia, he's not going to say that, young girls were hurt, and that is a travesty. And let me take you into the world that I saw when I was at all of those places with Epstein and Maxwell. He could do that. I'm not holding my breath.
Over the weekend, Prince Andrew announced he was giving up a number of his titles, a decision that came after it emerged last week that the prince hadn't been entirely honest about how long he remained in contact with Epstein. Leaked emails show that Andrew contacted Epstein after the photograph of the prince, Ghislaine Maxwell, and a teenage Giuffre was made public in 2011, saying, quote, we're in this together. Andrew also told Epstein to, quote, keep in close touch and expressed a wish to, quote, play some more soon. But in his infamous interview with Newsnight's Emily Maitlis in 2019, where Andrew claimed he wasn't able to sweat and had been at a Pizza Express in Woking on the night he was allegedly having sex with a 17-year-old trafficking victim. He also said he'd cut off contact with Epstein in 2010, something these newly revealed emails definitively prove to be a lie. Amy Wallace was asked about the prince's decision to give up his titles by Victoria Derbyshire last night. Here's what she had to say.
On Friday, Prince Andrew was forced to announce he was voluntarily giving up his Duke of York title and some other titles. He still retains them officially, he just won't be using them. What do you think of that?
I can speak for Virginia. I know that she would view it as a victory, that he was forced, by whatever means, to voluntarily give them up. For many, maybe particularly in the United States, but maybe even in the UK, it's a symbolic gesture, but it's an important one. It's made history, modern history, in terms of the royal era. I mean, I've never heard of such a thing happening. And it also is just a step in the right direction. You know, Virginia wanted all the men who she'd been trafficked to against her will to be held to account. And this is just one of the men, but he is being forced to, even though he continues to deny it, his life is being eroded because of his past behavior.
Prince Andrew will retain his dukedom as the Duke of York, which can only be removed by an Act of Parliament, but says he will not use it. However, today the SNP lodged an early day motion to formally remove Prince Andrew's title as the Duke of York. And pressure is also mounting on the government to do something about Andrew's residence in the 30-room Royal Lodge at Windsor, after the Times reported that he hasn't paid any rent there for over 20 years. No rent since 2003 for a property estimated to be worth £30 million. It's all right for some. The Metropolitan Police Service are also now investigating allegations that Andrew tried to find compromising information about Giuffre using his police protection officer, just before the infamous photo of Giuffre with the Prince and Maxwell was published in 2011. According to the Mail on Sunday, Andrew allegedly gave his protection officer Giuffre's date of birth and her confidential social security number in order to find dirt to discredit her. The Met say they're actively looking into those claims. Now, the allegations about Prince Andrew aren't the only harrowing details in Giuffre's memoir. She writes this about her years in the grip of Jeffrey Epstein, who died in prison in August 2019, and Ghislaine Maxwell, who is, of course, currently serving a 20-year sentence for sex trafficking. In my years with them, they lent me out to scores of wealthy, powerful people. I was habitually used and humiliated, and in some instances choked, beaten, and bloodied. I believed that I might die a sex slave. The manipulation and control that Giuffre describes being subjected to by Epstein and Maxwell will likely be familiar to many people who have themselves experienced coercion and sexual abuse, particularly as children. Giuffre's memoir also details abuse by a well-known prime minister on Epstein's private island, Little St. James, in 2002, when she was just 18. Here's an excerpt. He repeatedly choked me until I lost consciousness and took pleasure in seeing me in fear for my life. Horrifically, the Prime Minister laughed when he hurt me and got more aroused when I begged him to stop. I emerged from the cabana bleeding from my mouth, vagina, and anus. Giuffre said the unnamed Prime Minister raped me more savagely than anyone had before, and she pleaded with Epstein not to send her back. Her memoir continues. I don't know if Epstein feared the man or if he owed him a favour, but he wouldn't make any promises, saying coldly of the politician's brutality. You'll get that sometimes. The man in this instance is only referred to as Prime Minister, but in previous court filings, Virginia Giuffre had accused former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak of raping her, an allegation he has repeatedly denied. Barak, who served as Israel's Prime Minister from 1999 to 2001 and ran against Benjamin Netanyahu in 2019, had deep and widely reported ties to Jeffrey Epstein. Barak used several $1 million of Epstein's money to finance a security company in 2015, and he described Epstein as a, quote, collector of people in a special birthday letter in 2016. This was 8 years after Epstein pleaded guilty to soliciting sex from girls as young as 14 years old. And Barak was still visiting Epstein in 2016 too. Here's part of a news report from 2019.
One of Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu's main challengers, former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, covering his face as he entered the convicted pedophile's home. This was back in 2016, and on the same day, a group of young women were also seen arriving at Epstein's home. Barak is already trying to distance himself from Epstein and their business partnerships, writing on Facebook, "As soon as the present charges related to Epstein became known, I instructed my lawyers to examine the options we have for expelling the company associated with Epstein from this partnership."
Although Barak denied that he knew anything about Epstein's previous sex trafficking conviction and the allegations surrounding him until Epstein's 2019 arrest, leaked emails show that Barak was made aware on multiple occasions of the allegations against Epstein from at least 2011 onwards. And Barak even made plans to visit Epstein's so-called Orgy Island without his security detail in 2014. It has long been speculated that Jeffrey Epstein was involved with Israeli intelligence agency Mossad, and his links to senior Israeli politicians, just like Barak, do nothing to quell those suspicions. Dropzone News' Ryan Grimm reported last month that Epstein worked on behalf of Israeli military interests, even helping to broker a security cooperation agreement between the governments of Israel and Mongolia in 2017. There's undoubtedly still much more that hasn't yet come to light about Epstein's circle of influence and the people who had so much power and took part in so many crimes against children with him. This story will continue to resonate for the reason that Amanda Roberts, Jeffrey's sister-in-law, articulated Channel 4. Here's what Roberts said.
It's not just about the abuse of children, which is heinous, but it also shows the exposure of systems that have said for far too long, there is one set of laws for the rich and powerful, and then there is another set of laws for those who aren't. And it makes people angry because it's gone on for decades. And it really is that exposure of the abuse of power, of the abuse of the rich and powerful, the lengths that they went to intimidate these girls, to discredit them, to defame them, threatening their lives. It makes you angry as a person because it's like that could have been my child, and why are we allowing these systems to exist? We have to do better. We have to go after legislation, and we have to expose those who have been abusing their positions for far too long.
Kieran, obviously the point there about structural patriarchy and systems and wealthy and powerful men benefiting from that more than others, obviously all true, but there does feel, to me anyway, something quite uniquely disturbing about Prince Andrew and all of this. The language he uses, the reference he makes to his own daughters when he's about to have sex with a teenage girl. It does feel, even by the standards of this creepy, disgusting criminal world, particularly weird.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's unfortunately, more than unfortunately, disgustingly, it's the tip of a very large and very old iceberg, where there are groups of men with power, and of course Ghislaine Maxwell is in this picture as well, but predominantly groups of men with power. They create structures that enable them to sexually exploit people, often, of course, women. Now, that's not to say it's inevitable. I don't believe it is inevitable. It's not inevitable, but it is persistent in human history. And I think the only thing that's going to stop it is the destruction of patriarchy through the emancipation of women. And although Virginia Giuffre suffered disgusting, inhumane treatment at the hands of disgusting, inhumane men, I hope that in time she will be regarded, and I believe she will be regarded, as a part of that long story of the destruction of patriarchy via the emancipation of women, by, in her case, exposing many very high profile and taxpayer funded predators. So that's the kind of systemic stuff, Aaron. To your point about Prince Andrew and monarchy, I think it's important to talk about Prince Andrew, first of all, in the context of the power structures, but also individually, and question what he individually illuminates about monarchy, because I do think he tells us something interesting. When you watch Prince Andrew's 2019 interview with Emily mateless. It's absolutely astounding how kind of redolent he is of a 10-year-old boy trying to lie to adults. Monarchy, I think, is a form, especially today, is a form of forced infantilization. It has been ever since the age of absolutism died away and monarchs were no longer expected to be politicians. But especially in the 20th and 21st centuries, it creates these sorts of adult man babies who have no purpose, seemingly, except to kind of siphon up public funds as long as they can justify themselves or have the media justify their existence. And in Prince Andrew's case, have no sense of reality, let alone a moral compass. But I want to emphasize that's in no way to try and vindicate him as a victim or something of monarchy. Absolutely not. He is morally repugnant for everything that he did to Virginia Giuffre and possibly others. But it's important to understand, I think, what he illuminates about monarchy as much as the kind of larger structures of patriarchy and power that I mentioned before.
Oh, we talked a little bit earlier on about the money that was paid to Giuffre by Prince Andrew, and I said he paid her the money. It was £12 million a settlement. Rachel Maskell, an MP, recently said that we need to know where that money came from. And it's very important to say, in 2022, the Telegraph reported it came from the Queen. And that's extraordinary, right? That is utterly extraordinary. Somebody who was the head of state of this country for more than half a century, well over half a century, best part of 70 plus years, I think, right? She gave £12 million, according to the Telegraph, to pay off this poor woman who was a sex slave. I mean, the whole thing is just, it's almost incredible. When I say incredible, I don't mean as in, wow, this is a big deal. Incredible as in it's hard to believe. It stretches credibility, right? The fact that a potential Israeli prime minister is involved as well. The fact that one of the world's leading spy agencies, Mossad, potentially uses this guy maybe to get compromise on people. And again, you might think, well, that's just Mossad. It's a one-off. Epstein is a loose cannon. We've got a story later on about Nicolas Sarkozy. Actually, elites behave pretty damn badly. They behave actually a lot worse than regular people. But I have to say that the details of this story are absolutely horrific. Absolutely horrific. And I think the fact that Prince Andrew, the fact he's not in prison, the fact that he's not been questioned by the relevant authorities in the United States, I think he's a very lucky man. Forget, I can't use, the Duke of York anymore. The fact he can walk about surprises me, frankly. Israeli football team Maccabi Tel Aviv has announced it will stop its fans from buying tickets for the fixture against Aston Villa in Birmingham, even if the current ban on away supporters is lifted. Last week, a safety advisory group and West Midlands Police advised that Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters, who are known for violence and hooliganism, should stay away from the November 6th Europa League match against Aston Villa. The UK government says it is, quote, deeply saddened that fans of the Israeli Premier League team won't be coming to Birmingham, regardless of whether the ban on Maccabi supporters is lifted. A spokesperson for Keir Starmer said this: the government has been working around the clock to defend, if only they'd work around the clock for things that actually matter to people, to defend a basic principle, that football fans should be able to enjoy a game without fear of intimidation or violence. It is completely unacceptable that this game has been weaponized to stoke violence and fear by those who seek to divide us. We will never tolerate anti-Semitism or extremism on our streets. We will continue to work closely with the police to ensure that this game goes ahead safely and that Jewish communities across this country get the safety and security they deserve. Isn't it anti-Semitic to conflate British Jews with Israelis? Well, that's what they're doing, right? You're conflating a violent foreign football firm with British Jews. Isn't that anti-Semitic? If I did that on Novara Live, I'd be clipped up and cancelled on X. But apparently when a spokesperson for the Prime Minister says it, no big deal. Now, Let's not forget that this comes after the Tel Aviv derby on Sunday had to be cancelled by the police, that was before it even started, because of serious violence and rioting from the supporters of both Maccabi and Hapoel Tel Aviv. The derby match was due to take place at Tel Aviv's Bloomfield Stadium, but it was called off due to, quote, disorderly conduct, riots, injured police officers, damage to infrastructure, and, wait for it, risks to human life. And that's from the Israeli police. Are they anti-Semites who want to stop Jewish fans enjoying themselves now too? Is the Prime Minister going to condemn them? Keir Starmer had already nailed his colours to the mast over the Maccabi Tel Aviv versus Aston Villa game last week, saying the government would do everything in its power to allow fans of the former to attend. But Maccabi's management decided to pull the plug themselves. On Monday night, the club shared a statement saying it would not sell tickets to their fans for the match after, quote, hard lessons learned at previous encounters abroad, notably in Amsterdam last year. Interestingly, though, the unrest in Amsterdam in 2024, when Maccabi played Ajax Amsterdam, was largely centred around violent and racist hooliganism from the Israeli team's fans. And Maccabi Tel Aviv fans chanted, fuck the Arabs, you're the whores of Arabs, and we will take your girls who love to party, we will rape them. In one clip, hooligans are seen tearing down a Palestinian flag. It's clear that Maccabi fans are causing disruption and aggro at a number of away games, and in Amsterdam, that involved burning a Palestinian flag, stealing materials from building sites to use as weapons, and vandalising a taxi. I mean, this is just a crazy story all around, isn't it? Also, they found themselves in hot water in Athens quite recently. The leaders of Labour, the Tories and the Liberal Democrats, as well as Reform, have, of course, all slammed the decision to stop Maccabi fans coming to Birmingham. Culture Secretary Elisa Nandy even said this.
What is completely different about this case is not just that it's the first time since the early 2000s in this country that a decision has been taken to ban entirely away fans from attending a game. It's that the risk assessment is based in no small part on the risk posed to those fans that are attending who support Maccabi Tel Aviv because they are Israeli and because they are Jewish. Now, we should be appalled by that and never allow it to stand.
I thought the political class weren't big fans of, foreign thugs, right? Violent thugs from abroad aren't welcome in Britain unless they're Israeli, in which case, please come, and if you don't want them coming, you're a racist. Have I got it right? Even Nigel Farage wants foreign football thugs in the UK as long as they're Israeli. You can't make this stuff up. You literally can't make this stuff up. They are the ones that are singling out Israelis. Not you, not me. They're the ones, as Ash Sarkar so lucidly said on last night's show, they're the ones that want exceptional treatment for football fans precisely because they're Israeli, nobody else. Also, Lisa Nandy isn't correct here because UEFA banned Polish team Legia Warsaw from selling tickets to fans for 5 European away games after disorder at a match against Aston Villa in 2023. And in 2022, Rangers and Napoli fans were banned from attending one another's away games. But Reform MP Danny Kruger, who defected from the Conservatives in September, took things even further.
So the Culture Secretary is right to suggest that this is not simply an operational decision. She's talking a good game, but she also says that all she can do is to question the conclusion of the police, and now she's offering more resources, asking them politely if they change their decision. Does the government not recognise that under the 1996 Police Act, the government does have the power to direct police forces to make certain decisions, and if necessary to dismiss the chief constable? And if she doesn't think that, will she clarify the law? Will the government clarify the law to ensure that the government can have the power to overturn decisions like this?
Look, I'm not that sceptical about, for instance, elected politicians being able to set interest rates. I can see the argument against Bank of England independence, right? Quite a recent thing. We survived till 1997, right? I can see the arguments against the Supreme Court. You know what? We survived until 2009. That's when it was brought in. Okay? Britain was a okay place before that. Fine. What Danny Kruger is saying here is that, this 1996 law allows us to do things. And before 1996, presumably, politicians had no control over the police. News, I'm sure, to people involved in the miners' strike in the 1980s. News, I'm sure, to people involved in the general strike of 1926. Politicians, of course, can be involved in policing. They are all the time. The Metropolitan Police Service is answerable to the Home Secretary. The whole point of operational independence, though, is that politicians are meant to make laws, the police are meant to enforce them. This is a huge deal. Now, if you're watching or listening to this, you know I'm not going to vote for reform. But if you're thinking of voting for reform, this should worry you. The idea that a reform government would be removing operational independence from the police is of grave concern. It's not the kind of thing you normally associate with a developed country, with a democratic country, right? Are we going to get Nigel Farage involving himself in this or that murder case because he thinks the police are getting things wrong? I mean, this is ridiculous. You're there to govern. We have the police. If you want to abolish the Met and start again, great. I would actually do that. Get some more effective people running the thing, of course. You can't literally become the police, which is basically what Kruger is saying there. Downing Street said later that the powers Kruger was referring to did not apply in this context and could only be used on rare occasions, for example, a situation where human rights are not being respected or if there is widespread corruption within a police force. Kieran, I mean, this is all getting a bit weird. We basically have Danny Kruger, who was a very, very senior Tory before he joined Reform. You know, he'd been close to Cameron, had served in a cabinet. He's saying that we should even fire a highly senior police officer in order to have violent Israeli football hooligans entering the country. And I thought Reform's MO was to stop violent foreigners coming into Britain. What on earth is going on?
All right, first of all, let me say this, Aaron. If, like me, you regard the only viable, non-violent way of stopping Israel's monstrous erasure of Palestine and of Palestinian life, I think that the only way to achieve that is to ruthlessly and completely isolate Israel. And if, like me, you agree with that, then today is a day for celebration. Let's not, in our very legitimate hatred of Maccabi Tel Aviv, forget that. This is a day for celebration because, lo and behold, Israel sees in one small instance that it cannot commit genocide on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then on Thursday, play Europa League football as if nothing has happened. Football, for those of us who like it, is a joy. It's a special thing. Sport, for people who don't like football, is a joy. It's a special thing. And I'm sorry, but a country that commits genocide does not deserve special or nice things. It deserves severe punishment, or at least for the time that it's committing the genocide, it deserves severe punishment. And as you alluded to Asher's comments last night or the other night, Aaron, about exceptionalism. There's more than a dose of that going on here. The problem with exceptionalism, whether it's US exceptionalism or Israeli exceptionalism, is that you forget that nobody else except your own country people, your own compatriots, tend to drink deep of that exceptionalism, right? So you end up becoming so insular and convinced of your own exceptionalism that you expect exceptional treatment everywhere you go. And you completely lose touch with the reality outside of your own country. And just a very brief anecdote, personal anecdote that illuminates this. When I was being escorted by a police officer through the processing center at the port of Ashdod at the beginning of the prison experience in Israel after the flotilla had docked, or been forced to dock rather, I was accompanied by a police officer, and he genuinely didn't understand why Israel is so hated in the world. He didn't even understand what we were doing on the flotilla. And he wasn't trying to pull the wool over my eyes. And I don't think he was actually an evil psychopath. I think he was pretty stupid. And I think that he had imbibed his entire life this kind of insular Israeli exceptionalism. Then, of course, when the Israel lobby captures politicians, they're going to start parroting the same thing and echoing the sort of delusion, indulging the delusion of the exceptionalism from the country of origin, in this case, Israel. So that's what's going on with our politicians. I just want to quickly end, because we've done a lot of talking about this issue, rightly so, from the kind of politics outwards. But I just want to quickly talk about it briefly from the football outwards, because I haven't seen as much coverage on this. The Premier League, which of course doesn't handle Europa, but Premier League club involved, the Premier League has two official non-racism or non-racist policies, anti-racist policies. One is called Kick It Out. The other is called No Space for Racism. I go to quite a few football matches up and down the country. And it doesn't matter what stadium I'm in, whether it's Everton or Liverpool. If somebody is heard saying something racist by an official, if it's reported, and that's a key thing because it's not always reported, if it is, they will be kicked out of the stadium immediately. And in most cases, I think almost in all cases now, they'll be issued with a lifetime ban. And 30 years ago, that was not the case. 40 years ago, that was not the case. Even 10 years ago, that was not the case. Football terraces suffered from an epidemic of flagrant, disgusting racism, the like of which Maccabi Tel Aviv give voice to when they say things like death to Arabs. So as much as anything else, banning Maccabi Tel Aviv is consistent with football policy, the policy around football matches in the United Kingdom. And it seems to me that Keir Starmer and all those politicians seem to want to take football as much as politics, but football back 40 years, 50 years. Now, again, I just want to caveat all of this by saying there is still racism on football terraces in British stadiums. Of course there is. But there is far less racism than there was. And that is because of anti-racist campaigns stringently applied across football stadiums in the UK. Maccabi Tel Aviv coming to football stadiums in the UK and saying things like death to Arabs and invoking rape and so on would absolutely get you a lifetime ban, whether you're a British football fan, an American football fan, a French football fan, Israeli football fan. So it's just one more piece of evidence to underscore the utter absurdity of Lisa Nandy and anyone else in the political class saying that this is about Jewishness.
The double standard is crazy, right? The double standard is absolutely crazy. If you think about it. I mean, this is a country where 30 people are arrested every single day for saying stuff on social media, sometimes racist stuff. We have more people arrested in this country, I believe, for speech acts online than basically anywhere else. And okay, you might not include China or whatever because they don't have an open internet to the same extent that we do. But we arrest a hell of a lot of people for speech acts online. And the exact same people who think that's legitimate are also saying, please, let's have racist football hooligans enter the country because they're Israeli. We will literally hold our own people in this country, British nationals, doesn't matter where they're from, to a much higher standard than we will thugs and violent hooligans from one particular place. Which is why, as we saw last week, the polling showed there's a plurality in favour of those supporters not coming here. I think about one in 4 people strongly thought that Maccabi Tel Aviv fans should be allowed to come to the UK. About 42% thought it was a bad idea, 30% didn't know. So about 72%, 3/4 either didn't have an opinion or opposed the idea of them coming here. There's one reply in the comments saying, this was all discussed yesterday, no news. There is news, they're not coming, right? It's not up for debate anymore. Maccabi Tel Aviv have made the unilateral decision that they will not sell tickets to their own supporters to watch the game in Birmingham. I suspect you may still get some Maccabi Tel Aviv fans go, even if it's being played behind closed doors. Who knows? Maybe it'll be moved to a neutral venue. I suspect even if it is without home advantage, Villa are still going to spank them. But it makes you think. It does make you think. And also, I never thought I would see conservative politicians like Robert Jenrick reminisce about 1980s football culture. You know? We are days away from Nigel Farage saying that the Hazel disaster wasn't so bad. Very weird. I feel like I'm in an alternate reality when we report on stories like this. But there you go. Nicolas Sarkozy, president of the French Republic between 2007 and 2012, has begun a 5-year stint in prison. He is now in an isolation ward at La Sante prison in Paris after being found guilty of criminal association in a plot between 2005 and 2007. That's when he served as Interior Minister. This was to finance his ultimately winning presidential campaign, and the plots involved funds coming from none other than the Libyan government, and then led, of course, by Muammar Gaddafi. That was done in exchange for diplomatic favours. And when I say diplomatic favours, I don't mean a discount on Peugeots for Libyan staff at the Paris embassy or Chanel No. 5 on the cheap. No, I mean really big stuff. Libya and Gaddafi being brought back in from the cold and years of political isolation and sanctions. That détente began in December 2007, with Sarkozy, now the French president, having defeated Ségolène Royal in an election that April, receiving Gaddafi with full honours in Paris. This is a report from the BBC at the time. Libya and France have signed a number of business agreements at a ceremony hosted by French President Nicolas Sarkozy for Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. The deals include Libya's purchase of 21 Airbus aircraft and a nuclear cooperation accord. Their total value was not made public, but earlier, who would believe anything this guy says, right? But earlier, President Sarkozy said they would be worth 10 billion euros. That's around 7.2 billion pounds. Mr. Sarkozy has defended the welcome granted to Colonel Gaddafi in the face of domestic criticism over the visit. Opponents of Gaddafi's first visit since 1973 include France's opposition socialists, as well as Mr. Sarkozy's own human rights minister. France is the first Western country to welcome Gaddafi since he took the decision to end the country's diplomatic isolation 4 years ago. It's worth saying that negotiations for the sale of over a dozen French Dassault Rafale fighter jets, as well as military helicopters, were also initiated during that visit. So to repeat, the French president was willing to sell weapons to a guy that was previously considered a threat to the Western order, which of course he wasn't, to fund his election. And I thought Blair was bad. What makes all of this even worse, however, is that by 2011, Gaddafi was a bona fide bad guy again. The Arab Spring was spreading to Libya, meaning that questions were being raised as to whether NATO and specifically the Europeans should intervene. And the craziest thing about all of that was the person leading those questions was Nicolas Sarkozy, the man who is now in prison because his election campaign took money from Libya and subsequently ended Gaddafi's isolation in return, and who was literally willing to share nuclear technology with him, now wanted regime change. This guy is so dangerous, I wanted to sell him fighter jets a few years ago. Indeed, France, under Sarkozy, was the very first country to launch attacks against the Gaddafi government on March 19th, 2011. The very first. Those strikes came within hours of the relevant UN resolution, before even the US or UK could join in. Rafale and Mirage 2000 fighter jets carried out those bombing missions. Remember, some of those jets were the very ones that were being sold to Gaddafi. Meanwhile, France's Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier was also deployed to the Mediterranean, while French intelligence, reconnaissance and special forces supported Libyan rebels on the ground. In all, France conducted nearly 25% of all NATO air sorties over the North African country. This is like an Iranian uncle's fever dream of what Western hypocrisy and imperialism looks like. Believe me, I have one. It's so outlandish you'd think it's made up. But with Sarkozy in prison, one can at least argue that the hypocrisy came at a cost. After all, Sarkozy is the first French president to be incarcerated since General Pétain, who of course literally collaborated with the Nazis. Sarkozy has disclosed he'll be taking 2 books into prison with him. One is a biography of Jesus. The other is a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. That is, of course, the story of an innocent man, Edmond Dantes, sentenced to life in jail, but who escapes and ultimately takes his revenge under an alias, The Count of Monte Cristo. It's very good, by the way. It's one of my favourite books. Kieran, this whole ordeal really captures the hypocrisy of so much foreign policy, not just conducted, of course, by France, but the US and UK too.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, decent book choices. I wouldn't have chosen those 2, but not bad. Yeah, I mean, it does. I think Sarkozy's main mistake or problem in all of this is that he backed the wrong person, and actually his kind of doing things which led to Gaddafi's downfall is a bit of a riddle that we can unpick or speculate about. But I think fundamentally, to speak to what you asked me, what you alluded to, international relations is so it's so riddled itself with hypocrisy. It's unbelievable. And when I say Sarkozy picked the wrong guy, what I essentially mean is just look at Tony Blair, for example. I mean, Tony Blair's not alone. He is kind of unique to the extent that he's willing to be a cunning fox, but he's firm backs. For example, I can pick any number of examples, but Kazakhstan's dictator Nazarbayev is a complete crook, a complete kleptocrat who's siphoned up all of the resources of his own country, and Blair consults for him. Paul Kagame, a complex figure in Rwandan politics, but certainly a tyrant and a very violent individual who locks up political prisoners and has siphoned all the resources of his country off for his political allies. Blair provides him with, first of all, when Blair was in office, he defended him. He also provides him with consultancy work as well. In the early 2000s, Blair loved Vladimir Putin. Now, if you sold stuff to Vladimir Putin, you wouldn't be able to because everything would be frozen, or you would be in very, very serious trouble. In the early 2000s, it was in vogue. It was very encouraged. You could make a lot of money from doing it because of détente, because of the kind of thawing of relations that Blair and Bush were pushing for. And I mean, your question invites such a possible salad of examples, Aaron. You mentioned your Iranian uncle. You have family in a country which you'll know better than I do. In 1953, I believe it was, had a democratically elected government that was basically soft social democrat, removed from power, and the power of the Shah, the king, was risen to absolute with the backing of the Eisenhower administration, the US and the UK, and every Western power on earth, because they wanted better access to the oil supplies. If you'd done business with the Shah, you would have been handsomely rewarded. If you'd done business with his successors in the theocratic regime of the Ayatollahs, you would be sanctioned and imprisoned and so on. So, and yet both were, I mean, this is up for debate. You can tell me if I'm wrong, Aaron, but both were, let's say, extremely brutal in different ways and with different ideologies. So I could go on and on and on. I don't think I need to, but yeah, there's a hell of a lot of hypocrisy to go around. And this is not in any way, again, to vindicate Nicolas Sarkozy. Sarkozy was, as much as anything else, extremely skilled at dog whistle politics before it was quite as mainstream as it is in French politics now. He was very good at it. Famously, he went to a banlieue, French ghetto, if you like, a poor area, I think on the outskirts of South Paris, and referred to the people who lived there as lice in 2007. It drew a lot of criticism, but he was kind of pushing the envelope and testing the water because he was trying to steal votes off Le Pen, or rather stem the tide of votes from the right being lost to the far right. So he was very, very good as a pioneer of dog whistle politics in France, very formative in that connection. I can't stand Nicolas Sarkozy. I'm sure he does belong behind bars. I don't doubt it. But there is, as I say, a hell of a lot of hypocrisy to go around, and those are just a few examples of it.
I mean, it makes sense in a way, right? If you owe somebody $50 million, take him out. I don't have to give that back. And that's the reputed sum that was funneled by the Libyans into France. $50 million worth of cash. And of course, hypocrisy is replete throughout foreign policy, including the foreign policy of this country or the United States. I mean, there's that great line, isn't there? How do the Americans know that the Iraqis have chemical weapons? They've got the receipts. They sold them to them, right? And you had that story at the same time as the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, became this cause célèbre for the Labour Party. At the very same time, you had an 11-year-old Iranian ping pong prodigy being blocked from entering the country. That's fine. the 11-year-old ping pong guy is a threat to national security, but the racist, violent football hooligans, let them in. So there's hypocrisy, galore in this stuff. But I think what's really interesting, Kieran, with Sarkozy is that he's been punished, right? That's what makes this so weird and so unique in a way. I mean, it does make you wonder if Sarkozy can be punished for this, then why can't Blair for what he did? I mean, what Blair did was much worse. What Bush did was much worse. Kieran, do you think an elected president going to prison, even though it's not connected, it's corruption, it's effectively a domestic political issue rather than a legal war of aggression, which is what I would like Blair to go to prison for, does it expand the political imaginary a little bit? Because, people will say that Blair should be in jail and, a politician might scoff and you could say, well, the former French president is, why not?
Yeah, I'm always for not saying, no, that's impossible. It's beyond the realms of possibility. It's not going to happen decisively because actually it could happen. I mean, Blair could live long enough that a socialist government comes into power in this country. And the thing that people often forget about Blair, because he's so good at rehabilitating himself or trying to rehabilitate himself. And I say that actually 60, 70, 80% of that is the media willing to indulge him in that, the establishment media, which remembers, I think, almost sentimentally, almost nostalgically, how good Blair was as a political performer, political operator, and how he gave, as they say on Fleet Street, or used to say on Fleet Street, gave good copy. I think a lot of the legacy media establishment, path-dependent, barnacled legacy media establishment, is nostalgic for Blair for that reason, and so will indulge him in any fancy he has. Of course, he's also very powerful. He has lots of connections and so on. The thing that people forget, though, is that Blair actually, according to all opinion polling data out there, is very unpopular still with the British public. So all of that kind of astroturfed rehabilitation hasn't actually trickled down, hasn't percolated downwards and convinced people that Blair is a fit subject for rehabilitation, if I can put it like that. So he's deeply unpopular. And I think it's not beyond the realms of possibility that the guy lives to 100 or to 90, and in the course of the next 30 years, a socialist government comes to power. Dare I say, as happened in Chile with Pinochet. That might be a controversial analogy, but I don't see why it should be. And the kind of political tectonics completely shift. And Blair does find himself very vulnerable. That's very possible. It's very possible. I don't know if it's likely. I don't know if it's probable, but it's very possible. And for anybody who wants to see that, it's more onus on us, on them and on us to ensure that the left gains power in this country. Because it's not going to happen by magic. And it certainly won't happen because the liberal establishment hands Tony Blair over. But I do think that there's something unique that I just want to draw out in a sentence or two about Sarkozy, which is that you have to understand, Aaron, and people have to understand that Nicolas Sarkozy was always very unpopular with the powerful people around him. I think largely not because of his radical politics or anything like that, because of the way he operated. He's got a very bad reputation. He had a very bad reputation in his own party and amongst his own would-be or ostensible acolytes as somebody that you couldn't trust. And he gained a lot of enemies. So there is something in that as well that has to be mentioned around, the delivery of crooks or war criminals or whatever to justice.
Yeah, bad timing, right? Timing's everything. This guy is elected in 2007 saying we need a little bit more of the English-style capitalism. Then, of course, our model blows up. The global financial crisis happens and the global banking system, which is primarily Anglo-American, melts down. Not the best of timing. We've got a comment here from Stephen Calder. I think Starmer wanted Maccabi thugs to rampage in Birmingham, then blame it on the local community and anti-Semitism. However, Netanyahu figured that it might be difficult to spin. I think there's some truth to that, but also the stakes are so high. Imagine if they went there effectively on the orders of the government, bizarre, going over the head of the West Midlands police, and hundreds of people are hospitalised. I mean, that would have been a plausible scenario. And also, remember, Keir Starmer was basically implying that West Midlands police were racist. Isn't this crazy? This guy was the head of the Crown Prosecution Service. He's a sir. He's implying that a police force, which has made a decision on the basis of public order, he's implying they're racist. The dude is calling the police racist and recognize Palestine. Maybe Corbyn won. I'm being flippant, of course. I'm being flippant. Zack Polanski is the man of the moment still. Over the weekend, the Green Party announced that its membership was now larger than that of the Conservatives. And today, YouGov had the Greens on 15% in a national poll for Westminster elections. That is the second pollster to put the party on 15% in just a few days, the other being Find Out Now. YouGov is widely considered the gold standard in British polling, so even the skeptics will take this one seriously. Reform way out in the lead with 26, Labour on 20. The Tories on 17, the Lib Dems and the Greens on 15. According to our friends Stats for Lefties, that would put the Green Party on 12 seats and close to winning 10 others. Those 12 seats include 2 in Brighton, 4 in Bristol. Elsewhere, gains will be in Huddersfield, Leeds, Manchester, North Herefordshire, Sheffield. And then the marginals, which would be within the margin of error really, include Norwich South, Leeds South, Manchester Central. So they'd be very present in the major cities of England. Separate polling also has the Greens finishing above the Liberal Democrats in the Senedd elections next May. According to that data, the party would end up with 3 MSs. Meanwhile, Reform are way out in the lead over Labour. Accompanying the Greens' mesmeric rise in the polls has been Zack Polanski becoming increasingly conspicuous in TV studios. And last night he appeared on Robert Peston's show on ITV. Here he is responding to a question from The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crerar, about Labour allowing tuition fees to rise.
Now, Zack, the government says that without a rise in fees, universities will go bust. What do the Greens say?
This is why marketisation has completely failed. If you rely on the private sector to run universities on what should be a basic human right for people to be able to educate themselves, you get into these ridiculous situations. 1 in 3 children are living in poverty. We just heard about neat children there. Meanwhile, billionaire wealth collectively goes up £35 million a day. I think ultimately the government needs to be looking at the multimillionaires and billionaires to be making sure we're redistributing that wealth, including for education.
But we know that money is extremely tight and you can't do everything. So how high up on your list of priorities would funding university education be?
Well, partly I reject the idea that money is really tight. I think we'll always see tricky decisions for university students, for migrants, for disabled people. When are we going to see tricky decisions for the very wealthy in society? That being said, education is a huge priority for me and for the Green Party. And absolutely, I'm pleased to see that this is being extended, the maintenance loans, to care experienced young people. But I thought Robert's questions were right there. What about the young people who are just above the threshold? They're just going to be left out to dry, and that can't be okay.
Isn't that the danger, Zack?
I don't think there's an infinite pool of wealth at all, but there is a pool of wealth. And actually, lots of these people have wealth in assets, and it's not easy to, particularly if they're buildings. The Duke of Westminster owns half of Mayfair. He can't just take up that asset and be internationally mobile.
But he can, as he did sell 25% of his real estate portfolio.
Well, let's make sure that we go for the other 75%. So it's ultimately about making sure that we're taxing wealth and not work.
How has that got you, by the way? How is that? He sold 25% of his portfolio. Yeah, that's subject to capital gains tax. It should be higher. Zack Polanski would say that capital gains and presumably dividends tax, right now, tax on dividends from equities and stock in companies, that's taxed at a higher rate than capital gains. And of course, incomes are taxed higher for middle and high income earners. Incomes are taxed higher than capital gains. Zack would say that, Mr. Polanski would say that they should be taxed at the same level. How has that a gotcha? Yeah, capital gains should be higher. It should be higher. You shouldn't be taxed more for working than if somebody's selling their third property, which was an HMO. That's crazy. And it's quadrupled in value in the last 15 years. Why is that taxed at a lower rate than somebody having to go out and work? That's not a gotcha. Also, I'm really happy Zack Polanski drew into that question about, well, we know there's no money available. Did Pippa Crerar say that when Keir Starmer said that he wanted military spending to be 3.5% of GDP? Right? It's presently 2.5% I think more or less it's looking like an additional 16, 17 billion pounds spent on defence. Who said to the Prime Minister, well, we know money's tight, Prime Minister, how are you going to do it? Nobody said it. When Trident's being renewed and it's going to cost £100 billion plus, who says money's tight, Prime Minister, how are you going to do it? No, they say, I want the big red button to be even bigger. Or the royals. We're talking about Prince Andrew earlier. Can we afford them? Nobody says we can't afford the royals. But it's, can we afford to have students in this country pay less for what they study? You know, the average nursing graduate enters the jobs market with £56,000 worth of student debt. But if you think that's bad, you're not being realistic. Sorry. You're not being realistic. You need to be realistic and accept that we have to spend £100 billion plus on Trident. Which, by the way, doesn't even work if the Americans don't want it to work. It's not really an independent deterrent. Anyway, I could talk about Trident all day, I won't. But I'm very happy he said that. We all know money's tight. Is money tight for you? How much do you want? Is it going to stop your kids going to university? By the way, I'll be totally real. If I was 18 now, I wouldn't go to university. I wouldn't. Why? Why would I do that? When I went in 2003, that question wasn't even on the table because I didn't have to pay fees. And there were fees, by the way, back then, but I came from a family that didn't have enough money. And at the time, fees were £1,100, whatever. Towards the end of that show, Peston asked Polanski about the ban on Maccabi Tel Aviv fans. The question, of course, everybody has to be asked in politics this week. And whether or not they should be able to attend that away match in Birmingham.
Your deputy leader endorsed the banning of the Maccabi fans. So where are you on it?
Well, I'm one of 5 people in British history that have been Jewish and the leader of a British political party. So I take anti-Semitism really seriously. I don't think this was anti-Semitic at all, though. There's a very big difference between being Jewish and supporting the Israeli
But your
state.
deputy leader went further and said that in general he wanted to see a general boycott of Israeli sports teams. You can't endorse that, can you?
I absolutely endorse that. In the same way we have with Russia, we're currently seeing an ongoing genocide. And actually, I think it's important that athletes are allowed to play, but to play under their state banner or a city in Israel, I think is deeply problematic.
But Israel, you have to accept Israel as a democracy, and you're basically punishing essentially innocent citizens for, it's perfectly reasonable to criticize the Israeli government, but to punish citizens in that way is surely not appropriate.
Well, first of all, protesters who were on the flotilla recently were subject to torture. They were kept in dark rooms all day. They were not treated how any democracy...
Annoyingly, I'm told, which is really frustrating because I wanted to bring Katie in, but I'm out of time. That's it. So here's my closing thought.
I'm wearing an earpiece, right? There's somebody in the earpiece going, okay, Robert, Bobby, wrap it up, okay? Okay. And it's so great. There's just such a lack of equivocation there. You can't possibly... I do. I 100% accept that they shouldn't be in UEFA, pal. What are you going to do about it? And by the way, my party's polling 15% according to YouGov. You can't call me irrelevant. But you have to... Surely you have to accept... No, I don't. I don't have to accept anything. I disagree with you. No, but you have to. It's not appropriate. Yes, it is. These are ordinary Israelis. They shouldn't be punished. There was a 72-year-old RAF veteran kidnapped by the IDF in the Eastern Mediterranean. What did you say, Robert Peston? Why do you care more about the well-being of Israeli football hooligans than a 72-year-old RAF gentleman who ended up being kidnapped and taken to a prison in the Negev desert? Why do you care more about them than that guy? I want to know. What, that's appropriate? It's appropriate for a 72-year-old RAF veteran to go to prison for doing nothing. He was arrested in international waters. That's appropriate, but this is not appropriate. This is not appropriate. Surely it's not appropriate. This is how they work. Surely it's not appropriate. You have to have, by the way, you have to have you have to be a very strong person, very strong character to say, actually, I think it is. Completely disagree. You have to be a very strong person to go into a TV studio from a small political party. He's not even an MP. It takes a big character to do that. And I have to say, I'm not a Green Party member. I voted Green in the last general election. I said that Zack Polanski was the best out of all the people standing to lead the Greens. I said that. I had no idea he was this good. Genuinely. I had zero idea. Every time he goes on the TV, he gets better and better. And the thing is, we all have off days, right? Sometimes I'll host a show and I think it's a great show, showed us well. Sometimes today, for instance, I've had a cold for 3 days. You know, you're not on top of things. Every time I see Zack Polanski on TV, he brings 100%. He brings his A game. Really, really important in politics. You cannot have off days. You'll be punished. He's very good. He's very good. Kieran, is the Polanski bubble going to burst?
All right, before I get to Zack, let me just say one thing about the comments of Peston's at the end there. In a sense, he's doing us a favor. I mean, he's right. Israel is a democracy for Israeli Jews. And I think it's important to say that while also acknowledging the obviously rank exclusion of so-called Arab Israelis, both constitutionally and de facto socially from everyday life. Because what it does is it shows us that ordinary Israelis have a say in the political process and are therefore themselves also responsible for the genocide in Gaza, right? That's a very, very bitter pill for the liberal Western establishment to swallow. And because it always has to be some dictator's fault, or it has to be an authoritarian regime or a bad leader, Netanyahu, shadowy forces, or it's almost like the flip side of a conspiracy theory or something. It can't be more complex, and responsibility can't be distributed among so many people. I mean, not the innocent Israeli public. No. So actually, it's kind of useful. I mean, he's obviously deploying it for purposes quite to the contrary. He's saying they're innocent people. Actually, how can you do this? But no, what he doesn't realize is that he's implicating them by pointing out that Israel is a democracy, which of course it's not. It's an ethnocracy. But for Jewish Israelis, it is a democracy, right? And I think that that's useful in the context of the genocide in Gaza. So own goal from Peston, a goal for all of us who want to, as I say, attribute responsibility proportionately and appropriately. To Zack. Zack is, I don't want to sound unfamiliar. Sorry, that's a bit cringe. Zack Polanski is going from strength to strength. He is a much more impressive operator and performer than he was even before I went on the flotilla, I have to say. So I didn't get that much Polanski news while I was away. But since I've come back, I've been really, really impressed catching up on how much more robust he is. Forget polished. Loads of politicians are polished, but there's no substance. There is both substance and style at the moment. There's a kind of Goldilocks thing going on for Zack Polanski. And I think that is really rare in modern politics. And it's especially rare on the left, partly because maybe we get a harder deal than anybody else. We get, scrutinized more forensically and more unfairly than anybody else. So, maybe the dice is, or I should say the die are loaded. But Polanski is dealing with that really, really well. He's a very good performer. He's a good operator, and there seems to be a lot of substance. He seems to be a good thinker. He seems to have good thinkers around him. And so long may that last. Can it burst? Of course it can. Of course it can. If Zack Polanski carries on going at the pace he is, he will become a serious electoral proposition. Now, does that mean I think he'll beat Farage? It's possible. Anything's possible. I don't think so, but it's possible. And of course, I hope so. Does it mean that he could win 30 seats? I saw your interview with the person, I'm so sorry, I can't remember her name, but the Green Party lady who said to you that at the conference, she thinks 30 seats is a minimum. And that's the right attitude. Of course it is. If that's the case, if that translates to reality, then the Israel lobby is going to go for Zack, hammer and tong. I did it again. Zack Polanski. It's going to go for Zack Polanski, hammer and tong. And so I think, in the same way that in 2017, just before the surprise election in 2017 that ate into Theresa May's majority and created essentially a hung parliament. Just as at that point in time, the mainstream media had barely laid a glove on Jeremy Corbyn, I think we should expect, and I'm sure Zack Polanski does expect, and I'm sure his strategists are preparing for, more of a glove to be laid on him if it looks like what is right now a political force is becoming a viable electoral force, because he's made his views on Palestine and so on unequivocal, which is great to see and very refreshing. But yes, the Israel lobby will come after him hard. And yes, there has to be a strategy for that. And so far, the strategy seems to be don't give an inch. And that's the right strategy. So let's see how that goes as we move forward.
Yeah. I mean, he's only been the leader of the party for more than a month. I think 5 weeks. Maybe six weeks. I think it's the 6th week, actually. They've, more than doubled their membership? Overtaken the Tories, polling 15% in 2 separate pollsters. And he's on the TV all the time. He's on the TV all the time, by the way, because they all think, I'll be the one that cancels him. I'll be the one that scuppers his momentum. But because there is substance there, and I think that's really wise what you said, Kieran. He's not polished. He's that as well. He's not a polished political figure. He's a substantial one. There's something there. If somebody says, surely you can't think this, he'll say, no, I do. Sorry. Which is quite unusual in politics. Farage had it. Still does have it. It's very unusual to see somebody from the left have it and be unapologetic about it. It was very hard, of course, for Jeremy Corbyn because he had to manage this very large party, which included many MPs, most of his MPs, the vast majority of his MPs, who hated him. They wanted him to fail. It's easier for Zack Polanski, but right now he's pulling it off. We've got a £4.99 super chat from Stack. When these media pundits are drinking in London members' clubs, are they thinking money is tight in this society? They are for other people. We also have a breaking story, a news update. Britain has deployed a senior commander and a small number of troops to Israel to help monitor the Gaza ceasefire following a request from the United States. That's according to Sky News. Defence Secretary John Healey revealed this at an event for business leaders in London last night. That comes less than a week after the Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper said the UK had, quote, no plans to send soldiers. Always ends well, doesn't it, Kieran, when Britain sends troops to somewhere in West Asia? Seems to never have any downsides.
I mean, I think probably that this is just a showcase exercise. I think it's probably got zero substance. And I think that it will be regarded as such in Israel. And this is the thing as well that British politicians need to understand. They are considered irrelevant by Israelis. They're considered irrelevant in Tel Aviv. So, Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper, whenever I say this, people say to me, no, you're imbuing them with too high a degree of reflective capacity or something like that. But I genuinely believe that in years to come, Keir Starmer will be sitting in a study somewhere in retirement. And he might not admit it fully to himself, but he will know on some level that so much of his political capital, I don't say all of his political capital, but so much of his political capital was expended on straining every sinew and bending over backwards to help Israel with zero, absolutely nothing in return. And I think the same epiphany will eventually arrive in Yvette Cooper's mind as well. So such military decision-making is basically materially irrelevant, and it will be considered materially irrelevant in Tel Aviv as well as every other capital in the world. All Israel cares about is its relationship with Washington and more particularly with Donald Trump.
I agree with all that, but I mean, you're meant to announce this stuff to Parliament first. It's not meant to be given to the press first. And it was denied by the Foreign Secretary last week. I mean, look, if Boris Johnson deployed British troops without telling Parliament first, Keir Starmer would be the first person to say, this is outrageous, this completely undermines our political system. He's done it. Anyway, hardly breaking news that Keir Starmer's a hypocrite. Kieran, thanks for steering me through tonight. I've been recovering from an awful cold, and you've sherped me to a half-decent show.
Well, this is the first time I thought and said this phrase since being back from the flotilla, Aaron. We're so back. Thank you for having me.
We're so back. We are so back. We are. literally and figuratively. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We will, of course, be back tomorrow from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.